Ethics and Hilchot Tzedakah. Welcome back, everybody. And the reason I've chosen this name for the course, I just want to remind people, is that I'm not trying to make any definitive final statements about this is what the ethic of Hilchot Tzedakah is, or the ethics of Hilchot Tzedakah are, but having a broad conversation about certain ethics and how they might intersect with Tzedakah in general. So we talked about in previous weeks, first about proximity, about the idea that this idea of taking care of the people closest to you, whether that's geographically or physically or otherwise, has some sort of unique importance. We talked about urgency, the need to prioritize between extreme cases in need and less extreme cases. And this week, I want to talk about dignity, about how we think in terms of, or what the ethics behind Hilchot Tzedakah might be as regards the dignity both of the giver and the recipient. To recap a bit more from last week when we talked about urgency, we talked a lot about how proximity, the concept from class number 1, and urgency need to be balanced. That, for example, it's important to give, if you have limited resources to give, it's important, I think, intuitively to give to people whose life is in danger, as opposed to people whose lives might not be in danger, people who have more urgent needs versus less urgent needs. On the other hand, there's real value to doing chesed, giving tzedakah, creating a loving society close to home, whether that's to giving money to your family when they need it, whether it's giving money to people who ask you for it on the street. And then we looked at 2 different sugyot from the Gemara, one from Bava Batra, which dealt with under what circumstances should we try to investigate whether somebody who claims to need money urgently actually needs it. And then we also looked at a different sugya from Sanhedrin about when or whether our obligations might change when there is a more urgent versus less urgent situation of need. So we're obliged to help people broadly in general, but are our obligations any different when they need that, when their life is in danger, let's say, versus when it's not? And then we looked as well at this chart, which we're not going to go all the way back into Peter Singer and effective altruism. That's from previous classes. But this is just an example looking at a different theory, some of the philosophy of Peter Singer. Just my attempt at a chart about how different ethical claims can come together to inform an ethical mandate, instructions for how to do the right thing, how to be good people, basically. And we've been working on filling out a chart of our own, which is with regard to the ethics of Hilchot Tzedakah. I want to highlight, of course, that this is not an exhaustive list. The 3 bubbles we're going to fill out by no means constitute all of the ethical claims that inform the halachot that we have with regard to tzedakah, but it's a starting point. And so we talked about, we have proximity in one, we have urgency, and a third bubble, which is going to be dignity, that we're going to talk about today. So, dignity. Carol, do you recognize this chart by any chance? I want to be clear for copyright purposes. This is not my chart. I didn't make it. I couldn't find the original owner from the internet, but this is somebody else's chart online. Looks like it was from a kid's classroom or something. It's Rambam's 8 levels of tzedakah.
No, I've seen something like this before.
Okay, great. What have you seen before, or what strikes you
The
as
idea is like if you give a man a fish, you'll have to give him food again in the next day. But if you give him a fishing rod and teach him how to fish, then he can feed himself. So that if you can, to start with a person by helping them to become self-sufficient, helping them get a job, stuff like that. And then there's a question of anonymous, whether you want to teach that. You can't really teach anonymous, so that you can give cash anonymously or food anonymously, I guess. But the more, I guess, the closer you are to the person, the better it is for the person to feel valued. The further away or the less personal the tzedakah method. the less meaningful it is. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when you put yourself out there by actually spending time with the person who needs help, making eye contact, having a conversation, that makes a big deal of difference. And I think that's part of the dignity that the theme is today.
Yeah, so these thoughts are definitely all related to what we're talking about here. Just for those who may be listening, these are Rambam's 8 levels of tzedakah. Rambam in the Mishneh Torah outlines really a hierarchy. We're going to talk about what kind of hierarchy it is, of different ways of giving tzedakah to people who need it. We are gonna, I wrote down a list of these different types of tzedakah because I think that chart kind of skimmed over some of the important details of what actually we're being told. But just to briefly highlight what we're talking about, as you mentioned, Carol, the top level is was when the giver helps the recipient become financially independent, self-sufficient by means of a loan or a business partnership or just a job. And then we have a few levels that are about anonymity. We have a level where both sides are where there's kind of mutual anonymity. So somebody's giving money and somebody's receiving it, but neither knows. And then we have 2 levels where one side knows, but the other doesn't. Interestingly, he says it's a higher level it's a better version of giving tzedakah when the donor knows who the recipient is than when the recipient knows who the donor is. And then we get into kind of slightly different categories in terms of whether the recipient actually asked for the money or did not ask for it, how much is being given, is it enough? And finally, questions of in what spirit is the donor giving the money? So there's a ton to talk about here. And we could talk for a long, long time about the 8 levels of tzedakah. I am just bringing it in for a more limited purpose now, I think. And I want to pose this question to you, though acknowledging there's a lot more to say. What makes these 8 levels? What kind of hierarchy might we be doing here? Does that question make sense? Or might we be establishing here?
In other words, what's the common factor?
Let me explain a little more. It's like you might think that there are 8 levels of tzedakah. The highest level is giving $8. The second highest level is giving $7. The third highest is giving $6. These aren't levels of, or I might say there are 8 levels. The highest level is helping someone who's about to die. The second highest level is helping someone who is about to become badly sick. The third highest is helping someone who's broken their leg. I don't know. Do you see what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, but I don't think that's what he's talking about here.
Right. No, he's not.
I think it's about your attitude, the attitude to the person who needs help, and your generosity, and the means by which you're giving the help. That they have to be in a certain dignified manner.
Right, exactly. So that's exactly it. And hi, Felice. And the point I'm trying to make here is that a different philosopher making a different argument might have said, levels of tzedakah, that's simple. The highest level of tzedakah is giving the most. The second highest level of tzedakah is giving the second most. But Rambam didn't choose to say that. He also might have said, the highest level of tzedakah is giving to the person who needs it most badly. The second highest is giving it to the person who needs it the second most badly, but he didn't choose that either. So you're absolutely right. He's talking about levels relating to the dignity of the tzedakah process. The most dignified type of tzedakah process is helping somebody be self-sufficient. The lowest level, the sort of the least dignified type of tzedakah process is one in which he uses the term etzev or sadness, but the giving is really done in a negative spirit. So I think that in and of itself is a super, super interesting choice. And that in and of itself is telling us that the ethic that says dignity matters is a crucial guidepost, is a crucial influence to the laws of tzedakah more generally, is that we aren't thinking primarily about who deserves the money. We aren't thinking primarily about how much money should be given. We're thinking primarily about what does giving mean? What does the giver-recipient relationship act mean? So
you can tell that by looking at some of these
sorry.
content. You know, like it's better to give before you're asked to give. You know,
Right.
being asked to give, then that's on a lower level than giving spontaneously of
Which is
your own.
interesting because when I was revisiting these, I was struck by that one because I have noticed that I often do the opposite. With people on the street, I often say, I'm not just gonna like drop a dollar bill or a coin in their cup. I'm gonna wait for them to ask. If a person looks me in the eye and asks for money, I'll give them money, but I'm not gonna go out of my way to give it to them. I don't know what exactly. I think I had some rationale. I could probably articulate some rationale for that, but that's actually the opposite of what Rambam says. So that was interesting to notice in terms of my own practice. I want to move to some further points because I do want to get to this Gemara, but we can come back to these. And these are certainly, like I said, there's a lot more to say here. But was my point about the sort of the choice to make a rank of dignity as opposed to a different kind of ranking? Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So this may look familiar. This halacha from the Shulchan Aruch is we looked at partially during the first session 2 weeks ago when we talked about proximity. We looked at the idea that a poor person stretches out their hand and you can't give them anything. You have to speak kindly to them. And the point is about treating the process, basically engaging in this kind of dignified process like Rambam talks about. What I wanted to highlight, we talked about that already in terms of, the value of proximity, the value of building a loving, kind society. What's interesting here is what the Ramah brings in. The Ramah, for those who may not be aware, is the Ashkenazi gloss on the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch was created by, or was compiled by Rav Yosef Karo, a Sephardi rabbi, and the Ramah adds sort of an Ashkenazi perspective to the halacha here. So the Ramah is adding is actually saying that this idea of all you have to do is just be kind and create a positive interaction with the person who's asking for money is not enough. You have to give them something. Can't turn away somebody entirely empty-handed because it's a matter of dignity. Let not the oppressed return to shamed. Al yashuv dach nichlam. And that's a part of a pasuk from Tehillim, from Psalms. So there is a bit of a disagreement here baked into this halacha between the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch. But I wanted to highlight that because we're going to have different ideas. This is just an example of one disagreement about what sort of the minimum standard for dignity is. I might think that, I'm respecting your dignity if I just smile and say, I'm sorry, I can't give you any money. For the Ramah, that's not enough. You actually have to give something, even if it's very small.
I was just thinking, if you don't have money with you, you could maybe take the poor person to some place where they may have money. Go with him to the local grocery store.
Sure.
And say, this is my account and I'll come and cover his costs, but give him a meal. Something.
Felice, are you trying to unmute? Here, let me help. See, I hope Felice is.
I don't think we can unmute. Oh, she did it. No, it's still muted.
I clicked ask to unmute.
She knows how to do it.
Oh.
She's on her phone. Yeah. You're on your phone, Felice. You have to scroll right or left, and that will enable the voice. Looks like she's on my end.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna, oh,
Oh, now it's on
there
you.
you are. All right. Hi, Felice.
Hi. Okay.
Were you gonna say something?
No, I'm just thinking about.
Okay, we have
I'm
some good
thinking of that.
we have some good stuff we're gonna get to. So let's
Okay. Okay.
here is basically an overview of the Gemara we're gonna look at. And let's see if I can do that without causing a total tech disaster. But I'm gonna switch tabs here and we're gonna open up the Gemara.
Oh.
All right. Can everybody see the screen that says Ketubot 67b?
No, I
Yes,
don't see. How come I don't see?
it's up on the top. It says in small print 67B.
Okay, this is on Safaria. It has English and Aramaic that should be pretty relatively straightforward to follow along. We're going to look at this story from the Gemara and then talk about some halachot that it influenced. Again, thinking about the meaning of dignity and sort of what it means to what we saw in the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah just a minute ago was the beginning of, I think, a really important idea if we're going to be talking about dignity as an ethic of tzedakah, which is the idea that what is edifying and what is respectful of the dignity of one person might not be for another. That different people will experience the same action differently in terms of sufficient for their dignity or not sufficient for their dignity. And this Gemara, I think, addresses that really nicely. It's a bit long, so I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it in the Aramaic, and we're going to follow along in English, and I'll help translate as we go. So it starts at Tanu Rabbanan here at the sages taught. This is going to be an introduction to our main point. Tanu Rabbanan yatom shebalisa sorchin lo bayit matziin lo mita v'chol play tashmisho ve'achar kach masiin lo isha. So this is all within the context of a young boy, really a young man, I hope, if he's getting married, who is an orphan, he's poor, and this is about the community meeting his needs for getting married. Shneemar de machsoro asher yachsarlo is quoting a pasuk to explain what we have to do for him. De machsoro ze habayit. The part of the pasuk that says de machsoro, that says do what is sufficient for that which he lacks. This refers to setting up a house for him. The part that says which is deficient, that's referring to getting a bed and a table for him. Exactly. Lo, and for him, that part of the sentence refers to getting him a wife. Zo isha. And there's some wordplay with a different pasuk to make that point. Okay. This is now the more toward the center of what we're getting at. Concerning this issue, Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught, De machsoro atamitzuve elav lefarneso. You have to, when we're commanded to do whatever is sufficient for this young man's deficiency, whatever he needs, when we have to supply him with whatever he needs to make up for that which he lacks. What exactly does this teach? You're commanded you're commanded to support him, but you don't have to make him wealthy. You just have to meet kind of his minimal needs. And the Gemara explains the obligation encompasses only deficiencies, only things that really every person would need. However, there's an exception to that, or it's more complicated than that, because the pasuk also states when it says asher yachsar that the idea is it's asher yachsar lo, it's that which he lacks. This individual person with his individual personality and needs and existence in the world, what he lacks might be more for one person than for another person. Let's give an example. Even a horse to ride, a servant to run in front of him if this person, let's say, used to be extremely wealthy and now has no money at all and needs support, if what he's used to is having a horse and a servant to run in front of him, amru alav al hillel hazaken, that you need to supply, you, the community, or you, the individual, need to provide those things to this person, because they're considered as if they were basic needs, because they were elements of what this person needed in life. And we have a powerful story as an example about Hillel Hazaken. There was a poor person of noble descent. He indeed, there was such a case, and Hillel Hazaken found him a horse and a servant. One time there was no servant available to run around and do this poor person of noble descent's bidding. Hillel himself, this great rabbi of Chazal, of our sages, ran in front of this guy and his horse for 3 mil, which is an ancient measurement. I don't have the math exactly, but it's a long way to meet this person's needs. So let's pause here. I found this story incredible. What are your reactions?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
The philosophy of socialism is each according to his ability and each according to his needs.
Right.
So in a way, that's what this paragraph is saying.
But what kind of needs?
But in this case, that's physical needs. This is obviously psychological needs. This is having to do with dignity. Again, so if somebody was used to being rich and having a servant and riding a horse and suddenly has no funds to do that, you have to somehow supply him with that.
Right.
I question whether that's so necessary. He could borrow a horse, lend him a horse. Having the servant.
Change his expectations.
I mean, it's too.
Yeah.
It's a little bit too much. I don't want him to be punished for losing the money, but it just seems a little too much. It doesn't seem to go along with the limited amount you're going to supply the basic needs for the person who's getting married.
Right. So I want to highlight a little bit of the Hebrew to that point. I mean, yes, first of all, I have a very similar reaction. It seems a little crazy, but this is a really, really close reading of the words that's getting us to this point. The phrase de machsoro, meaning giving him just that which is sufficient for what he lacks, is part of the pasuk, but asher yechsar lo is also. And lo, that which is, so this is that which is sufficient for his needs, and then asher yechsar lo is that which he lacks. The emphasis is on lo, is on him. We have to supply him not just what's sufficient for his needs, but what he individually, this person, lacks. And yeah, I agree, the example is ridiculous, but it's also very powerful, because what it tells us is that we have to notice every single person who's fallen on hard times, who we're trying to help. We have to notice, what is it about them that is particularly hard for them, about their state of need right now? How do we meet them in the place of lack that they are? Trying to think of an example from modern day. Maybe you have a little kid who is poor, and their parents really need every dollar of charity they can get. Their parents are going to need to feed them and to clothe them and to meet all their basic needs. But what if this kid loves baseball and really, really, really wants to go to a Yankees game? There's an argument to be made for paying to give the kid that experience, if you know that about the kid, rather than giving them food or giving them clothes. I'm not saying obviously the circumstances will be different in different cases, but that's kind of what I imagine here, as there's just an extremely powerful compassion in the kind of noticing the Gemara is asking us to do about what a person needs, even if it does come up with this ridiculous example of, of giving this person a horse when, presumably you don't need a horse to survive.
And there are charities that take kids to the ball game.
Right. And you
And
could argue, why aren't they feeding them?
charities that
That's true.
bring in entertainment or take kids to camp that, have diseases. Yeah,
That's true.
it makes more sense when you put this example, or say the child has musical talent, and now you can't afford the music lessons. Would make sense to set up a scholarship for that child to have music lessons.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a form of dignity. Exactly.
Form of dignity.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I guess it's the example that they use that bothers me.
It's yeah.
You don't have to own a horse.
Example. So I want to look now. However, there's a flip side to this Gemara. We're going to skip a little bit just because there's a lot of interesting stuff here, and this whole daf would be interesting to learn. But we're going to look at just another story in a similar vein, just further down the page. So here's another incident the Gemara is going to relate concerning tzedakah. Ha'udata lekame leRabbi Nechemia amar le b'ma'ata soed. So a certain person comes to Rabbi Nechemia, and this person needs money, needs food, is poor, and asks, what kind of food can I get by you? Amar le bevasar shamin v'yen yashan. Oh, excuse me. Rabbi Nechemia said to this person, "What do you need? What can I get you?" And the person said, "Oh, well, I have an expensive palate. I eat fatty meat and aged
wine.
aged beautiful red wine from the Napa Valley. Ritzoncha shetigalgeli mi ba'adashim." Rabbi Nechemia asks him, "Do you want to maybe not be so fancy and just have some lentils with me? Because I'll share my lentils with you." The guy says, "Sure." Gilgeli mo ba'adashot v'met, and died, presumably due to his pampered, sensitive palate not being able to handle the humble food of lentils. Amar, Rabbi Nechemia said, "Oy lo lezeh sheharago Nechemia." Feeling terrible out of himself, I killed this guy, this poor guy. Nechemia, meaning myself, did this awful thing and killed him. But the Gemara interjects and says, "No, Nechemia, adarabba. Oy lo li Nechemia sheharago lezeh." Oh no, so sorry, I skipped a point of it. The Gemara is saying, is it you who killed him? Did he die by accident? Mi baile, but so the Gemara, interesting, is maybe siding against Rabbi Nechemia here. But the it seems that the dispute between Rabbi Nechemia saying what the Gemara is saying Rabbi Nechemia should say is whether it was it this person's fault for having a sensitive stomach? Was this man to blame for his own death because he was unable to digest lentils, which one really should be able to digest, or was it Nechemia's fault for killing him and giving him foods that he that this man would have more easily eaten? Sorry, I know I explained that in kind of a confusing way. I think I misstated it at first. The Gemara seems to be censuring Rabbi Nechemia here and saying that Rabbi Nechemia, you maybe did something wrong, but Rabbi Nechemia seems to be saying that, or seems to mean, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry that this man died, but really it was this is not a condition one should get oneself in. Is that
Yeah.
clear now?
Seems to be blaming the man, the pauper, for having such a rich diet. I mean, you don't die from a change of diet in just one day, first of all,
Or one
Right.
meal.
or one meal. It's
We
not
have to
going
suspend disbelief a little bit regarding the details of this
No,
case.
but fatty meat and a lot of wine can kill you and build up plaque in the arteries. And
That's true.
it was his time. And it probably was a shock for him to suddenly be poor. And that's probably what caused his death. And nothing to do with the food.
We're gonna
That's-
pretend that the medicine works like the way they say it does, and we'll go with that. Yeah. But what I found interesting here is a little bit of, we start to see a rebuke to the idea of maybe there's a limit. And this will take us back, I think, to our slides here. We established, that we are commanded to account for the specific individual and what quality of life means to them and what dignity means to them in terms of how we meet their needs. Let me just make this full screen here. We established that what that dignity is subjective. It's going to differ person by person. But what we haven't established is, are there any limits? And that's where I think the later part of the Gemara is coming into the conversation. Is at what point do we say to the person, I get that it's hard for you to live a more humble life now that you're poor. I get that it's hard for you to go without your luxuries, but enough is enough. We can't acquiesce your every need.
I mean, you have to have that conversation, but I think anybody would understand that.
Yeah, so let's look at what the halacha says, because the Shulchan Aruch relates pretty directly to what we talked about above. And I've kind of tried to highlight the important parts here, but basically, you have to give the person the day machsoro, the that which is sufficient for what they lack. But and there also is this idea that you have to give people that which they've been accustomed to before. That's what the Shulchan Aruch, the non-italicized section here, is talking about. And they give the exact same example of the horse, of the slave running before him. But the Ramah puts an interesting qualification onto this halacha. The Ramah says that it appears that this all applies to gabayim. The gabayei tzedakah are a category of basically professional, I don't know if they're professional in the sense of getting paid, but kind of their job in society is to provide for tzedakah funds, or to rabim beyachad, many people who come together and do charitable work. But it's not a matter of your individual obligation as a person who encounters somebody poor to furnish them with their non-basic needs, with the needs that more relate to their subjective dignity. So it's all well and good that, the whatever charitable foundation is taking kids to ball games and is giving them music lessons, but you, the individual, are not obligated to do that. It's not considered an affront to their dignity if you fail to do that for them. All you really have to do is meet their basic needs. And I found that to be a kind of helpful qualification. I really like this Ramah here, because it is, I think it's a meaningful distinction to talk about what does society owe, or what do the most kind of charitably powerful or charitably privileged elements of society owe people versus what does the average individual owe people. Any thoughts on this? Is this clear, this distinction?
So in a case like that, the case should be brought before the community, basically. If somebody was a big macha before previously and now lost everything in the stock market crash, the community needs to give him some kavod.
Right. Or let's say there's, this guy from the community, you see him sitting on the sidewalk, Nebuch, he's really, in bad shape. You still have the requirement to help him buy food if he asks, or even if he doesn't necessarily. You can tell that he needs it. But you do not have the requirement to get him a car that is nice enough that he won't feel like he's fallen so far in the world. The community might have an obligation to give him a car that's nice, that's nice enough under this halacha. Which is, that example doesn't necessarily sit well with me. I understand how that might sound like,